So, now let us discuss about the 25th December 2015 newspaper. The first article is related to the climate change negotiations and Paris conference recently closed. So let us take a brief history what has led us to the Paris conference. So India is a country that is highly vulnerable to the climate change, and also it is the third largest emitter of carbon and greenhouse gases. In this context, India is sandwiched between two goals of development and also the carbon reduction. The Western countries want the specific reductionable targets from India, but however India don't want to take them forward because of its developmental needs. On the other hand, China has committed to the peaking year and also the clear, verifiable and monitorable reduction targets. India has talked about energy intensity reduction rather than emission reduction. So what was India's plan? India was, along with China too, was sticking on equity, common but differentiated responsibilities. India has got its favorable response, but however, there are certain things which have gone against India too. So, the climate justice, what India talked about is the Western countries have to take the responsibility for the historical emissions after industrial revolution that they made. But America and all the Western countries, they did not take these historical responsibilities. So what the India's argument is, the carbon space which is available now after the consumption of two-thirds of the carbon space by these developed countries shall be left to the developing countries for their developmental needs. So the West has to take the greater responsibilities and decarbonize their economies first before India is expected to do. After that, the INDCs are agreed for every country, and India has pushed for 10-year verification mechanism or monitoring and verification mechanism on a 10-year round or a 10-year schedule. But finally the Paris conference agreed it for 5 years. And also in 2018, there will be a stock-taking situation how the countries are progressing on their INDCs. And the transparency was an important clause in which the $100 billion promised by the West after 2020 for the adoptable needs of the developing countries, it will be verified meticulously as like the INDCs. So in this context, least developed countries have demanded for keeping the target at 1.5 degrees C. So in line with this, in 2018 itself, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change will take a review. So these are the promises made in the, things happened in the Paris conference. So India has got something and lost something. So the first thing is, so there is no going back on India's INDCs, and it has to implement its international obligations. India has largely dependent on the renewable energy for this purpose. So in this context, 175 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2022, of which 100 gigawatt will be from the solar energy alone, is the target of India. So, as solar energy is forming the major base, what we need to do? First is, we have to revisit our Make in India program, and we have to establish the manufacturing base for the photovoltaic cells and solar panels. Now if you take China, Taiwan and Europe, these are the major destinations for the manufacturing of these things. And second thing is, making mandatory by every household to use these rooftop solar panels. So in this context, in Japan, a perfect system was developed. A solar panel placed on the rooftop will be connected to the feeder, and that electricity produced will be sold to the so-called as distribution company, and it is also becoming a mutually beneficial to the government and also to the individual. So in-feeder meters etc. have to be created in India to motivate the people towards this purpose. And then decarbonizing the travel. If you observe in India, the travel in density growth is around 6%, and vehicular emissions are equally going to grow by 6%. So in this context, developing the alternative modes of transport, that is public transport, is very critical. If you take the Singapore as an example, car is made as a very costly tool even for the rich people. It is to encourage the public transport. The similar mechanism can be brought in India too, where the public transport is to be encouraged. In this context, move the people, not the vehicles, is the slogan. And the second is, the developed country is one where the rich people will take the public transport rather than poor people will own a car. And finally, the forest is a great carbon sink. So the development of forests and forestation has to be taken forward, and the corporates also need to be encouraged towards sustainability. So a sustainability code has to be induced to them. So violations have to be severely punished. This is how we need to take forward. So article majorly focuses on scaling up solar power by strengthening the Make in India in this line and decarbonizing the travel industry. Next, putting the house in order. Especially if you take Rajya Sabha in this session, it was frequently prone for the disruptions. So even Hamid Ansari, the chairman of Rajya Sabha, expressed an anguish yesterday. So what is exactly making this? How can we improve this situation over here? This is an expected question last year actually, because of the Lok Sabha disruptions that have happened. What are the reasons for this? The parochial politics, which are leadership centered in India, can be said as a major reason. For example, under the generally political party members who turn into members of parliament, they give their loyalty as MPs to the political leadership. The reason is they believe that they have won the elections because they got a ticket from the political party leadership. Lack of internal democracy in the political parties can be said as a major reason. And also, certain structural constraints were there to apply the rules. If you see the legislative business, how it goes on. So a pre-legislative work or pre-session work will be like this, where all party meeting is held and agenda is discussed. Under what rule a particular topic has to be taken is discussed over there. So in this context, the government, it feels if anything is going to disturb it or undermine it, then it can block that particular issue for discussion over there. So that's why the opposition parties believe that their agenda cannot be taken forward unless there are disruptions. So the disruption is one way taken as a route to express their anguish and dissent. So in the British Parliament, there are two methods which are followed, which can also be tried in India. 20 days in a year is earmarked for the opposition agenda to dominate in the House. And added to that, there is significant minority. What does that mean? If 20% to 25% of members ask for a debate on a particular issue, yes, on a written notice, that will be taken up, and this is what is called significant minority. In that way, a dissenter voice of the opposition can be made heard in the legislative houses. But it will be effective when these members of the parliament are willing to be rule bound. On the other hand, the article suggests of changing power equations. As I said before, the power centered around the leadership is the major reason for the directions, and whims and fancies of the leader are directing this. So, our centralized political systems plus anti-defection law, the whip, all these are curtailing the individual voices. So, the centralized leadership can be countered through the democratization of the party system. Internal elections have to be conducted in the party, that has to be undertaken through a legitimate institution such as election commission. So anti-defection law has to be repealed. That's what is the article was talking about. If you can see how the parliamentary system was put for use, how the horse trading of the MPs and MLAs have happened, I don't think that anti-defection law has to be removed at this particular moment. But we need to explore the other ways. How can we improve the freedom of speech of the members in the Parliament House, how new systems shall be made to work. So one thing is changing the power equations between the leader and members, that itself can play a very critical role in the process. Now, smart cities versus livable cities. So the author argues that the smart cities project, it majorly concentrates on a few important items. These are, that is, especially 11 elements. These 11 elements are majorly focused on infrastructure. So the smart city shall not just focus on infrastructure, it also shall focus on the socio-cultural factors, yardsticks, and development of better livable cities in the country. So we have to shift it from smart cities to livable cities mission, in which we have to improve on likes of Amsterdam, Paris, etc. So already Indian cities are in very much bad shape and are news for the excessive pollution. So in this context, making the pollution-free, safety cities by improving the governance, by addressing the migration challenges is the need of the hour. So in this context, the Livable Cities Index, which was given by the Economist magazine, it places the Indian cities on the very low front. So in this context, the criteria which are mentioned in the livable cities, they are much wider, and India also need to take these wider criteria into cognizance. And one best feature of the Smart Cities mission is it wants to economically mark every city on specifics related to the cuisine of the city, or related to certain natural or something specific economic product to that particular city. So that's also giving a special identity to the city. For example, Hyderabad, Biryani city. Now, if you talk about Bhopal, it might have something of this kind. If you go to Thiruvananthapuram, you have, the so-called as Thiruvananthapuram, the fish curries of Thiruvananthapuram. Like this, you have many varieties. If you go to Mumbai, so the Britannia, that is Parsi food is famous in that Britannia. It is the old age restaurant you can see in the fort area. So like that, a uniqueness have to be identified, and the Smart Cities mission has that. So a centrality of the article is how we shall shift from the Smart Cities mission to the Livable Cities mission. Now, cess. So yesterday we have seen that how the cess is been, the money under the cess is not put into use. So without keeping that money into use, the government is going to provide for greater cess. If you observe, the 14th Finance Commission has increased the transfers to the states from the center. So in this context, the center now has a greater incentive to increase its financial resources. And cess is the best way, because the outcomes or the proceeds of the cess need not be shared with the states. And the second thing is the money under the cess has to be used only for the purpose it was intended. So in these circumstances, we have to bring in a rightful planning before a cess is introduced. So almost 1.4 lakh crores of money, either it is a protection of building workers, BD workers, or universal access of telecommunication services, or educational cess, anything we take together, it is coming up to 1.4 crore rupees. So you know that any rise in taxes, it is going to undermine the economic activity. So one way at the cost of the economics, we wanted to bring in welfare through cess, but however, neither of these two things happening. So the economic costs have increased, but the welfare programs did not happen, which is a dismal state. In spite of this, the government is further pushing the other forms of cess without properly utilizing the money. So in this context, the government shall make it properly used. Next, judicial overreaction. Already we know that the contempt of the court has a violation of natural justice, generally has a conflict, where the court itself is a judge against its own contempt. So the contempt of court is also criticized that it is curtailing the freedom of speech of the individuals, and also the Supreme Court and the higher judiciary shall not be too overtly sensitive, too oversensitive towards the comments against the judiciary. So in this context, a lighter comments and an article written in the newspaper shall not attract the so-called as judicial overreaction. So it decreases the respect of the judiciary. So in this context, read about the contempt of court in your polity notes. The next article is about Syria, the Geneva peace talks. We know that UN Security Council recently passed a resolution on Syria in which a peace between the Assad regime and opposition has to be found, and after that a constitution has to be brought in. An interim government which is non-sectarian, all-inclusive will be created. So this is what is the UN Security Council's plan was. Now all the major powers are divided on identifying who constitute the opposition parties with regard to the national unity government. Now what is the India's position on to this? India wants to have a solution to the Syrian crisis through dialogue and diplomatic efforts, which includes or the decision shall be left to intra-Syrian dialogue. So in this context, opposition and the Assad regime are being brought across the table and the discussions are supposed to go forward. And added to this, the major challenge is most of the Syria now is under the occupation of ISIS. So how it has to be brought under the electoral regime and how they have to be included with regard to the state control is a major question. Now, Russia and India defend choppers. So, in this context, the major positive development is they are going to be made in India. I think it is the first defense deal which is going to be in line with Make in India, where the Western companies they are coming and performing are making that in India itself. So, added to that, on the economic ties, we want to take them forward from $10 billion to $30 billion in the next 10 years. And Russia is going to be the biggest arms supplier. So one thing which has attracted to me is the Russia and India are going to fight against the terrorism without distinction and discrimination between the terrorist groups and the target countries. So it means it is specifically appears to be directed against Pakistan. In the recent moves of Russia to move close to the Pakistan, that gets much importance. So the Make in India, it is the first time where the private players are also being included in the talks. And the second is this talk about the Pakistan. These are the two things which are attracting me. And thank you very much. All the best.